I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, it's September 4th in the afternoon here in Israel, and what I want to talk about today is Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech the other night and what it focused on, the Philadelphia corridor, and by implication, the terms of what could or could not be a deal to release hostages and a ceasefire. So there are essentially three elements to this talk: the content of the speech, the actual happening of the speech, and what it means for negotiating and what are the real issues involved. So let me start with this. Bibi Netanyahu is known as a very, very good speaker. He's got many public appearances under his belt going back decades. You wouldn't have known it from his Monday night talk. It was focused primarily on me, I did this and I said that and I whatever, some of which is true, all of which is irrelevant. Attacking his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, which may or may not be correct or legitimate. I'm not going to get into the internal politics here at the moment, but I don't need to hear that in a public speech. And focusing on what is known as the Philadelphia corridor, which is the strip of land and road that runs along the border with Egypt. Incidentally, the Philadelphia corridor starts on the Mediterranean coast in Gaza and continues all the way down to the Red Sea coast, the Gulf of Eilat, near Eilat. Philadelphia is everybody knows it now, code name for the road that runs down along the Egyptian border. But of course, the part we're talking about is that which runs inside of Gaza and under which and over which the terrorists have smuggled untold numbers and quantities of weapons, equipment, munitions, and the like, as well as smuggling in and out people, terrorists, and smugglers have used it for drugs, women, guns, all the stuff that smugglers will smuggle. Let me say that his focus on Philadelphia is interesting, and I'll deal with that in the third part of the talk, but it was overly focused. It didn't really deal with the issues at hand. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is the ultimate blow to this talk that, as I said, from it, you would never know that Bibi Netanyahu really has the qualities of an excellent public speaker. The second aspect of the talk is that it took place at all. We're in the middle of negotiations. I don't believe the negotiations are going anywhere, primarily because Hamas has no real reason to deal. But that's a subject in and of itself. But nonetheless, if you're in the middle of negotiations, you don't get up and make a public statement in an international forum, because it was broadcast internationally, saying, I am not going to compromise on this issue. You don't want to compromise? Don't compromise. But to state that openly is poor negotiating technique, and I've done a bit of negotiating in my day. You never give away your position in public. I didn't always give away my position in private. You play it out, and here I have to say that Sinwar is doing an excellent job at this, very, very high grades. You give nothing. And if you're going to compromise, you do it quietly, and if you're not going to compromise, you do it quietly, and you make your position known once, and then you let it go and let the negotiators go to work. If you're going to tell your negotiating team, this issue is not for compromise, so you tell them it's not for compromise. All that speech did, aside from shore up his base, which I'm afraid is becoming more and more of Netanyahu's reason for doing things, was to aggravate the Americans, aggravate the American administration, and needlessly so. And the key here is needless. Your position is against them, then deal with it. Your position is seen as unreasonable by the administration. You can attack that from a number of different angles, including the fact that Hamas just murdered 6 hostages of applying psychological warfare to Israel and getting Israel to stop its offensive. That was the only reason. And that raises into question how much they want to negotiate, or at least they want a deal. They want an Israeli surrender, but how much are they willing to negotiate proper? These are legitimate issues. You do not get up in public and say, this is my stance and I'm not moving from it. Because you know what? You might. And now to the issue itself. The Philadelphia corridor is important. I can say that I was involved in dealing with the tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor when I did a short stint in the Gaza division in 2002. This is prior to this engagement. The Gaza division's headquarters was inside Gaza, next to Neve Tikalim in Gush Katif. And we had a problem then. There was smuggling under the border. We were on the Philadelphia corridor, but we had no control beyond it. In other words, sitting on top of tunnels doesn't help you. You've got to extend your control deeper into the area where the tunnels enter or exit. And in this case, the city of Rafiach. We were not able to operate in Rafiach. But this is not a new issue, and it's not one that's solved with a very thin force rolling up and down on the border. It helps. It slows them down a bit. And under the circumstances of today, possibly even more so, because they're going to have to dig new tunnels and establish new entry and exit points from Rafiach, which we've basically conquered and defeated them in. But it raises a number of interesting questions, which don't reduce the importance of the corridor. Minister Netanyahu has been prime minister for over a decade. And all of his talk of, well, in 2004 I said this, and in 2008 I said that, and in 2009 I did this. The bottom line is that from the day he became prime minister until a few months ago, the IDF, even in operations in Gaza against Hamas, was never given the order to take and control the Philadelphia corridor. And even during this war, which nominally started in October, and let's say the maneuver started in November, the Philadelphia corridor wasn't touched until late May. Now, I will tell you with absolute certainty, the IDF could have conquered the Philadelphia corridor in November or December, and any time after that. So one could reasonably ask, if it's so important, why leave it for so late? And that's a tough question that I can answer along with the other one of the decade of negligence. Netanyahu, his government over time, did not recognize the importance of the corridor. So now he does, let's say. He raised a very important point. And here, with all the criticism, the point is the point. The IDF says that it can withdraw for 6 weeks, and if necessary, go back in. And tactically, the IDF and its leaders are 100% correct. An Israeli division driving from Kerem Shalom on the border with Gaza up the corridor to the Mediterranean can probably take it and control it within a day or two, not much more than that. Netanyahu, on the other hand, raises another point. Will we be able to do it? And that's a broader political, geopolitical, international, diplomatic, strategic question that is far and above the tactical one of can Israeli tanks roll from the Israeli border to the Mediterranean along the Philadelphia corridor in a reasonable amount of time. Now, I would say that as prime minister, you're in charge, and the answer has to be, I have to. Yes, I'll give the order, and I'll deal with the consequences. But the fear is legitimate, and it shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. The bigger issue is that the Philadelphia corridor is actually part of a 3-segment control issue that Hamas has said publicly it will not compromise on. Now, there's a big difference between Hamas saying it and Israel saying it. Nobody can pressure Hamas. You know, the American administration and the other mediators, Qatar and Egypt, when they talk about reaching a compromise, what they mean is pressing Israel to come closer to Hamas's uncompromising position. So Hamas can make the statement, nobody's going to touch them one way or the other, and they mean it. The 3 issues, or the 3 segments that Hamas refuses to compromise on are the Philadelphia corridor, the Rafiach crossing, the border crossing from Gaza into Egypt, and the Nitzarim corridor, which Israel controls as a buffer zone between the southern strip, Khan Yunis and Rafiach and their villages around, and the northern part of the strip, Gaza City and its neighborhoods and suburbs. Hamas clearly, desperately wants to move back into northern Gaza. And all of their conditions for a hostage deal are built on that. Ceasefire, Israeli forces withdrawal from Gaza, Israel relinquishing control of the Rafiach crossing, the Philadelphia corridor and the Nitzarim corridor to Hamas, or leaving, and whoever's going to move in there will ultimately be Hamas, to permit them, to bring more equipment, munitions, and whatever they need back into the Strip to replenish. They've taken huge damage since October 7th. Give them a bit of breathing space to reopen training camps so the new recruits that they brought in the last month or so can be trained up to at least some minimal competent level, and move all of that into northern Gaza, into Gaza City, Bet Hanun, Sajaiya, and the other neighborhoods and towns around it, in preparation, once again, for the starting of a war which could start after 6 weeks, or it could start a little bit later. But what it basically means is allowing them to arm and, more importantly, booby trap all of those places, all of those buildings, the roads, the paths that Israel would be using to go in there, as well as tunnels, which Israel hasn't gotten to entirely, and they apparently didn't booby trap well enough because we destroyed a large number of them up until now. And this now brings us to the impossible calculus. How many hostages are still alive? The Israeli estimate places the number at most around 60 or 65. It's my opinion that the number is lower, and not because I'm a particular pessimist, but because I know that official estimates are based on evidence knowledge. In other words, knowing that some 35 of the hostages have already been killed out of the 100 to 101, 36, leaving that number. But what about the ones who have been killed we don't know about? There's got to be some, because it's just the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. But let's say, for argument's sake, 60 or 65. How many Israeli soldiers will die unnecessarily as a result of having to go back into a beefed-up, booby-trapped, fortified Gaza that is not the case at the moment? 30, 50, 70, 100? What would we do if Hamas made a public statement and said, we are going to kill 10 hostages unless you execute 10 of your soldiers on the border? Would we agree to that? I don't think so. I'm sure we wouldn't. But that kind of bloody calculus is precisely what Hamas is trying to get Israel to get into, without talking about what the cost will be if Israel gives in to the demands. I put all of that up for consideration. I wish I had good answers. I wish I had answers. But I think that asking these questions is critical in understanding the difficulty without going into whether Sinwar is ultimately going to release all of the hostages. I believe that he won't. Let's leave those details aside for the moment and simply ask, how far does Israel go beyond the basic tactical issues in order to try to get to some agreement with Hamas somewhere along the way? So with that, once again, September 4th, afternoon here in Israel, and wishing you all safety, be well, stay engaged, stay safe.
Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.